welcome, and thank you all for being here today. So I wanted to give everybody a chance to come in, settle in, and I thought we could just start with just a few minutes of arriving together in the room. So if you are comfortable, you can close your eyes, or if you'd like, you can just bring your eyes down to a soft gaze. And we'll just take a moment to arrive together. So you might bring your awareness into your body, just noticing whatever you may have been doing earlier in the day to get here, whatever you may be doing when you leave here, to just imagine that you might be able to leave that at the door as if hanging it on a coat rack, so that this next bit of time is just for you. An opportunity to be present in here. And taking a moment to just think about what it was that piqued your interest to come here today. Is there some area of your well-being that you'd most like to cultivate? Are there things you're aware of that may get in the way of living your fullest life? And I invite you to think of if there is a particular word, one single word, that may come to mind that represents what you most might want to bring into your life in this year ahead. And some examples of a word might be things like, and words that really capture well-being for you. So it might be the word open, welcome, willingness, yes, freedom, trust, health, acceptance, connection, surrender, laughter. If there's a particular word that comes to mind, then to note that, and if not, to just allow that to percolate as we go through the afternoon. And then bringing your awareness back into the room. And welcome everyone, and thank you for being here. So I'd like to start off by sharing 3 quotes with you. And these quotes are going to give us a little bit of a roadmap for where we're going today. So I have some little props, visuals to share with you along the way. So you're all here for cello lessons, right? So this first quote that I want to share with you is a quote by Richard Davidson, who is a researcher at University of Wisconsin in Madison. And I heard him give a talk once, and he said that well-being is fundamentally no different than learning to play the cello. And I love that quote because it really captures a lot of the neuroscience that has been coming out, and research in positive psychology as well, over the past 15 or 20 years, that tells us that well-being is actually a skill that we can cultivate at any age, and no matter what our life circumstances, that there are things we can do, there are tools we can bring into our day, many of which don't actually take a lot of time, that can help us experience deeper levels of well-being as we go through our day and our lives. So we're going to be talking about that today. So the second quote is by a man named Jake Ducey. Get this right here. See this one? And he says that the biggest obstacles in our lives are the barriers our mind creates. So a little bit of bad news. We have these obstacles that can get in the way of our well-being, and they happen to be common, universal ones that we all share. And I'm going to talk more about that today, but I happen to bring those obstacles with me, and so I'm going to show them to you. First one is that we have a false alarm. The second one is that we have, and you got to kind of use your imagination a little bit on this one, but I call this the stuck dial. So if you imagine that there's 2 settings, we have an off setting and we have an on setting, and that this dial was stuck in one position. That's our stuck dial. we also have another challenge. We have the noisy person at the movie theater. And finally, we have a Velcro problem. So you probably didn't realize that you had these challenges before you walked in the door, but don't worry, we're going to talk about some ways for how to work with these. Okay, and finally, our last quote, which is really my favorite, which is that obstacles, this is a Zen proverb, obstacles do not block the path, they are the path. And so when we can recognize what these challenges are that we have that can get in the way of our well-being, we can work with them. We can use some of the tools that we're going to be talking about today to really find actually the gift in each one, so that these obstacles are no longer really obstacles, but they're opportunities to grow inner resources for resilience, for well-being, for compassion, for joy in our lives. So we're going to start off and going to spend a little bit of time exploring what these 4 obstacles are that I'm sharing with you today. And then we're going to, at the second part of the talk, we're going to look at some tools for how do we work with these. So what do these 4 things have in common? So let me move these back here. So these 4 obstacles, what they have in common is 2 things that I want to call your attention to. Of course, this will make a little more sense as we go along. The first one is that these are all universal mental habits. So the kind of, what I'm referring to here is these are inner mental habits of our mind that we can get stuck in. And they all evolved to help us survive as a species. Back in cave person times, back in the savannas, we needed to survive some very harsh conditions. We had external threats. We had predators of all kinds, saber-toothed tigers and the like. And so our minds evolved our brains evolved ways to help us survive. And so all of these are connected to, in one way or another, to our survival circuitry. And the challenge is that a lot of these circuits of our brain, if you will, can operate a lot in the background of our lives today, in our modern lives, in ways that we may not realize. And so we're going to explore how that is and how that may get in the way of our well-being. So it's a little bit like having an old IBM computer that hasn't been upgraded in a really long time. And that some of these programs can take over more than we may realize. And the other commonality is that when our mind is left to its own devices, it tends to default to these patterns, to these habits of mind. So we can get stuck in these habitual reactive modes of being without really being aware of it. So let's take a look at the first one, our false alarm. So you all have one of these in your home, hopefully. And it's designed to go off when there's a life-threatening emergency, when there's a fire. But I don't know if your home's like mine. Thankfully, mine's, I've never had a real fire. But it goes off once in a while, fairly frequently, burning a piece of toast. The smoke alarm doesn't know the difference. It can't detect a life-threatening emergency from that toast that's burning in the toaster. Our brains are wired in a similar way. So we have an alarm system that's built into our brain and that we walk around in our day scanning our environment for threats. Now, this was really adaptive back in cave person times because the kind of threats that people had to face were the saber-toothed tigers and the lions and other kinds of predators. And what happened is the brain evolved to have this fight or flight response. So when we perceive a threat, what happens? Heart rate goes up. Blood pressure goes up. Blood gets pushed towards all the fighting muscles. We get ready to fight the enemy or to flee, to run the heck away. And one of the things that happens is stress chemicals get released into our bloodstream. And that was really adaptive. That helped us to survive. This same response can happen and does happen throughout our day, but the kinds of threats that we perceive are a lot different now in modern times. But we have our traffic jams. We have our relationship challenges. We have our financial worries. We might have worries about what people are thinking about us. We might be afraid of engaging in something new. We may be worried about our kids. We may have, are just struggling with our own self-worth, self-esteem. So all of these kinds of threats as we go through our day, if you will, can set off our stress response. And that feeling of stress, I imagine, is familiar to everybody here in some way or another. Now, why I call it a false alarm is because those stress chemicals get released, we get prepared to fight or flee, maybe not in a full-blown way, but nonetheless where it can, if chronically we sort of go along and experience this stress without finding ways of resetting, without really paying attention to this alarm signal, maybe ignoring it, maybe pushing through, that over time, chronic stress can create a lot of wear and tear for us. Now, short-term stress can actually be adaptive, it can be helpful, it can energize us, mobilize us, help us perform at our peak. But what I'm talking about is more that long-term chronic stress, kind of running, that alarm running in the background, like that car alarm going off on the street that people just sort of ignore, you just get so used to it. And a lot of times we get so used to feeling stress, experiencing stress, that it just kind of becomes the norm. And so the idea is not to eliminate stress from our lives, which is impractical, unrealistic, but to begin to pay attention to this signal in a new kind of a way. So not to be stress-free, but to be stress-smart. How can we begin to listen to this stress signal in a way that can be more adaptive? Often fighting or fleeing, going into our old reactive patterns to how we respond to stress is not the most helpful way to solve the problem at hand. A couple of personal examples. One is that for me, one of my habitual ways of experiencing this false alarm is that I'm wired very type A. And so I go through my day sometimes, if I'm not careful, if I'm not working on it and paying attention, feeling like I have to be constantly busy, constantly doing something all the time. And that if I slow down, if I kind of sit down and sort of like let my guard down, there's almost a sense of something's bad's going to happen. I've got to keep going. That's me, type A. Another way that this shows up for me is feeling like, so much to do and not enough time to get it all done. And so just constantly trying to fit everything in, particular day where I was trying to bring my daughter to the doctor's about an hour away. I had emails to do, I had work phone calls. I was trying to get all this done, and my habitual reaction is, if I can't fit it all in, I get frustrated. I tend to get stressed. But what I want to do is to just pause for a moment and give all of you a chance to reflect on what is your habitual pattern to when you're faced with a challenging situation. Some of the little day-to-day annoying things, maybe some of the bigger things as well. What are some of the ways that you respond or react when faced with some of those stressors and challenges? So just some questions for reflection. Feel free to write if you'd like, or just to think of these in your mind. But one is to notice, when does your stress response get triggered? So are there certain times of day? Are there certain patterns? Are there certain themes, certain people who trigger your stress, certain conditions under which you tend to experience stress? How do you react when you're faced with that kind of a challenging situation or stressor? What is your habitual way of reacting when that happens? Some common things for people, some people tend to yell, to explode, to emote. Some people tend to stuff the stress away, ignore, maybe plow through, just keep pushing through. Sometimes not even noticing that alarm is going off at all. So just really thinking about noticing what it is for you, how you relate to that. And do you have ways to reset after the stressful event has passed? or even at some point in your day, so any opportunities to reset, because often we can carry stress around with us, almost like a heavy sack, and we just forget to be able to put it down sometimes. So just thinking about ways that stress may show up in your life. And just to emphasize that I call this a false alarm, not because the things that we're dealing with in our lives aren't truly difficult, because many of them are, but again, because some of our habitual ways of reacting are not necessarily the most helpful. And when our survival networks are turned on, when we're in that stress mode, we actually get a kind of tunnel vision. And I don't know if you can relate to experiencing this, but it can be harder to think clearly. It can be harder to step back and see the bigger picture and to figure out sort of what might be most helpful here when we are in that stressful place. So I want to talk about the next challenge here, which is the stuck dial. So for this one, I'm going to simplify the brain science a lot here, but imagine that there were two dials. Okay, so we have on one hand, we have where we are fully engaged, present in this moment right now. And the second position is when we're in a mind-wandering mode. And it turns out that as evolution has it, that our minds, when we're not focused on a specific task at hand, our minds wander a lot. And we end up often going through much of our day in a kind of an automatic pilot, lost in our heads. We can be thinking about the past. We can be thinking about the future. We can get stuck in all kinds of ruminations and that take us away from being right here in this present moment. And so with some examples of that, this kind of mental distraction. But thinking about driving from point A to point B. How much of us are, really fully attentive, taking in all of the scenery, paying attention to everything going on as we're driving along? And how much are we sort of zoned out somewhere in our mind, in our head, in our thoughts? And maybe we recognize, how did I even get here? Or how about even just being in a beautiful place or going for a walk or sitting in your backyard and being able to, just recognizing that maybe 5 minutes or 10 minutes has passed and all of a sudden you realize you're in your head, you're thinking about something you have to do, you're worrying about something, and you've missed out on the beautiful scenery that's right there in front of you. Or another example would be even when we have conversations with people. How much are we fully 100% attentive and present with that person in front of us? Or maybe our mind is really a little bit somewhere else. We're sort of thinking about things we have to do. We're a little bit distracted. And so this kind of mental distraction is quite common. About 50% of the time, one study suggests that we're in this mind-wandering mode when we're not focused on a task at hand. And what this means is that as we go through automatic pilot, we're missing these little moments of our lives that are right here in front of us. And so it also turns out that research tells us that when we're not present, when our mind is wandering, we're less happy. We don't experience as much happiness. So one personal example that I want to share is that I was at dinner with 5 of my friends and sitting there having this lovely dinner, and at some point in the midst of the dinner, I started thinking about, happened to be a very busy time. I was doing some traveling, I had projects, so my mind starts going into this kind of mental rumination, this mental rehearsal into the future about all the things that I had to be doing. I have to be, how am I going to fit all this in? And next week I'm going to have to do this, and then and here I am, and having this great dinner, and my mind is completely somewhere else. And so missing out on what's happening right here in front of us. And that's a very common experience that we all have. But a lot of times we're so used to it, we don't even recognize that we're on automatic pilot. So just to take a moment and to think about in your own life, in what ways you might notice that stuck dial. How much of the time are you aware of being caught in your head, or maybe there's ruminations, maybe thinking about the past, thinking about the future, being anywhere but here. You know, even something like eating a meal, taking a shower. We're often not present with these ordinary moments of our lives. And in contrast, to think about a time when you felt really present and alive. And just notice, ask yourself, you know, what was it that you were doing? Maybe doing a hobby that you love, maybe playing with a child, maybe, you know, being in some beautiful space. But just calling up that feeling for a moment and remembering what that feels like to be fully alive and engaged in what's here in front of you. And imagining what that might be like to be able to go through our lives with a little bit more of that. So let's see, I'm going to do a 1-minute little exercise, a little experiential exercise for all of you. And so I'm going to be quiet for 1 moment, one minute, 60 seconds. And what I want you to do is, if you're comfortable, you can close your eyes. If not, just bring them to a soft focus. And I want you to just notice where your mind goes. So there's no goal here. You don't have to try to do anything special. But just simply be curious about noticing this kind of mind wandering, this mental chatter that is quite common for us human beings to have. So here, are you ready? And go. And come on back into the room. That was just about a minute. Did anybody's minds not wander? I'd like to talk to you afterwards. So you're an exception, but I think for most of us, there tends to be a lot of mental chatter. So just something to observe, something to notice.
I got about 10 seconds.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And that's common. And even, you know, when people meditate, and we're going to talk a little bit more about this as we go along, but it's common to have that chatter. And it's not necessarily a problem, but it can, there's a way, sort of just the paying attention to it that can be helpful. So want to go on to our next mental habit here, the noisy person at the movie theater. So imagine that you're sitting at the movie theater enjoying your movie, and all of a sudden this noisy person sits down next to you and starts a running commentary of everything that's going on the screen. So, you know, oh my God, can you believe she did that? This is a disaster. You know, what's wrong with him? Oh, this is so stupid. I can see where this is going, and this is not going to end well. And here you are, just trying to enjoy your movie, and you have this constant voice next to you, carrying on this whole, you know, commentary that can be quite, you know, distracting, really take you away from enjoying your movie. Well, the way that evolution has it is that we human beings have a kind of inner dialogue in our minds. Because of the evolution of language, we don't just experience things directly, we attach a story, we have a commentary, we have an interpretive lens through which we see things. And that there also may have been some evolutionary value to have this kind of inner narration, this voice that says, you know, sort of constantly dissatisfied, looking for what's wrong with the present moment to be able to fix it. trying to overestimate threats, exaggerating things, catastrophizing things. All of those things were helpful for our ancestors to some extent. But that we begin to, in our modern lives, this voice can be very powerful, whether we're aware that it's there or not, that we often believe the thoughts that we say to ourselves. And when we believe these thoughts, it can often be a source of suffering or additional suffering for us. So I want to give you some examples, but just really beginning to think about what some of the stories are that we tell ourselves about these small things as we go through our day and some of the bigger things in our lives. So even just noticing the power of our words, our language. But when something goes wrong, we might say things to ourselves like, this is a disaster. Or if we're facing a challenging situation coming up in the day, we might say, oh boy, this is going to be a nightmare. This is going to be awful. That kind of thought forecasting. When some of the bigger things in our life, losing a job, perhaps the story that gets attached to that is, I'm a failure in some way. Or experiencing a breakup of a relationship and believing or thinking, that we're unlovable or that there's something wrong with us. Or if something, wanting to do something new and saying, I could never do that, I'm not smart enough, I'm not whatever enough. So beginning to notice what are these stories that we're telling ourselves. And just as a little experiment for a moment, I want you to think about, even something like making a mistake. And so what does that voice sound like in your head when you make a mistake? For many people, it can sound something like, I'm such an idiot, I'm so stupid, how could I have done that? What's wrong with me? Everybody's going to think badly of me. I can never get things right. And so we often have this voice that's quite critical, that we often talk to ourselves in ways that we would never talk to anybody else. And we miss that compassion that we often bring to others. And if it's not the self-critical voice, then often, again, it could just be distorting things, exaggerating things. This is a disaster, this is awful. Things that can really raise our stress or evoke more negative emotions for us. So just out of curiosity, how many people have a loving, supportive, compassionate, encouraging voice that follows them through their day? Anybody? And how many people have a voice that says, something's missing, something is wrong, not good enough? Anybody can relate to that? I know for me, I struggled for many years with this voice of I'm not good, I'm not enough. I'm not good enough, I need to work harder, I need to do more, to be loved, to be valued. This is the noisy person at the movie theater, one of the many variations of this noisy person. So just thinking about how the things that you tell yourself as you go through your day, these little stories, these interpretations, big and small, how they may impact you. And whether they are, and some just questions for reflection. So what does that noisy person sound like in your head? Are the things that you say to yourself accurate? Or do they tend to be a little bit distorted, exaggerated, blown out of proportion, some all or nothing thinking, especially when things go wrong or when things are difficult? So just noticing, beginning to notice as you even leave here and go into your day. Some questions for reflection. So finally, I want to tell you about our Velcro problem. This is one of my favorites. Neuroscientist Rick Hansen says that our brains are like Velcro for the negative experiences and Teflon for the positive experiences in our lives. And so the negative experiences can stick right to us and the positive ones can slip away. And this had some good survival value for our ancestors. It was really important for them to be able to remember the negative experiences so they could avoid them. It was also important to remember positive experiences, but not to the same extent. So our brain fast tracks the negative. Not as critical for ancestors to remember where those carrots could be found. As Rick Hansen says, if you don't find a carrot today, you can always find a carrot tomorrow. But if you forget where that tiger's lurking behind the tall grass over there, no more carrots forever. So we have this brain that's really good at holding on to negatives as we go through our day. Quick little story that I want to share with you from a blog by Daniel Goleman, who's a psychologist. And this is a story about Larry David, who some of you might know. He is the creator of Seinfeld and Curb Your Enthusiasm. So he was, apparently according to this story, he was at a Yankee game one evening, and at some point during the game, the camera found his face in the crowd, and they put his image up on the big Jumbotron screen, and the crowds went wild. Everybody stood up and started cheering. And later on, at the end of the evening, he's walking to his car, and somebody rolled down their window and they yelled out the window, "Hey, Larry, you suck." And he was just, for the rest of the evening, that's all he could think about. Why did this person say that? What's wrong with me? Why didn't they like me? And it was as if those 50,000 fans didn't even matter. So how do we, just to begin to think about, how do we go through our day? And if there are 10 positive little things that happen in your day, and one thing that is more of a negative thing, which is the one that we tend to latch onto? If somebody says 10 things they really love and appreciate about you, and maybe one thing that they think that you really could improve on, which is the one that you tend to hold on to? Which is the one that might even keep you awake in the middle of the night? So just reflecting on and noticing, how does that Velcro problem show up in your life? Are you aware of maybe getting more stuck in the negatives, missing some of the little positive moments in the day? So we have these 4 evolutionary challenges, these 4 mental habits that we can get stuck in. We have this false alarm, our stress response, which all of these can be adaptive and helpful in certain situations. But when our alarm goes off chronically, it can create a lot of wear and tear for us. We can become self-protective. We can get this tunnel vision. It can be hard to see what might be really most helpful. When our dial gets stuck in this kind of mind wandering, thinking about the past, thinking about the future, we're missing out on the present moment right here. When we have this noisy person at the movie theater, that voice in our head that may be self-critical or distorted or exaggerated, then it can kind of take us away from being able to have greater perspective and greater compassion for whatever difficulties we are experiencing in our lives. And when we have this Velcro problem, we get stuck in the negatives, and we may miss out on these little positive moments that can really contribute to the well-being of our day if we can notice that they're there. So I want to talk with you now about what we can do about all this, right? How do we work with these? And what I want to say is that all of these, again, are really part of these survival networks of our brain, that they all played some role in our survival, but we also have wired into our brain networks for thriving, for resilience, for joy, for lots of positive emotions, for compassion, for connection. And we need to sometimes be able to dial these down in order to access those networks to really thrive and be alive in our life. And so there are some tools that can be helpful. And I have a toolbox here. So the challenge with the toolbox is that we need to remember to carry the toolbox with us, to carry the tools around in our day. If we leave it in our garage, it's not going to do us any good. So I'm going to share 3 tools with you today. And the first one is our flashlight. So why do we need a flashlight? We need a flashlight because we can't change what we don't see. So these mental habits are automatic, they're reactive, they're habitual. And so if we want to begin to shift how we're going through our day, we need to be able to see what's here. We need to be able to notice that that we're getting stuck in these habits in the first place. So let's go back for a moment to our cello. Imagine that you've been playing cello your whole life, and you get into this habit of holding the bow in a particular position where the music, sounds, you've been doing this your whole life, and so you have a particular way you're holding the bow. The music sounds okay, but maybe it's not as clear, it's not as beautiful as it could be. And all of a sudden, somebody kind of holds a flashlight up to you, metaphorically, points out to you to say, hey, you know what? If you gently shift the position of the bow, the music, the notes can sound much clearer, crisper, and even more beautiful. So you go, you sit down, get ready to play the cello again, and you go right into your old habit. But this time, because you have this flashlight, you notice, oh, wait a minute. Yes, I can make some adjustments. I can catch myself, and I can start to shift and change, and you begin to experiment. And the next time you go to play the cello, you might catch yourself a little sooner. Oh yeah, wait a minute. Remember this flashlight? I can notice that I'm going into that old habitual habit. I'm going to try to shift and adjust. And eventually, over time, you begin to make these adjustments so that music sounds more beautiful and clear. And that is what the gift of the flashlight allows us to do. So it's a way of stepping out of kind of disconnecting or disengaging from the autopilot of a plane and suddenly having infinite possibilities available to us. And so the real magic of this flashlight is that it creates a little bit of space. It gives us that pause, that awareness to notice what's there. And in that moment of awareness, all of a sudden there's choice where there had not been choice before. And so this sounds so simplistic, and it is so simple, but not easy. And it's also can be incredibly profound. So just to go back to some of our examples, if we bring this, and actually let me just say a word. What am I really talking about? I'm not talking about a flashlight. What I'm talking about is awareness, or mindful awareness, or mindfulness. And one definition of mindfulness that I want to share with you is the definition that Jon Kabat-Zinn uses. And he says that mindfulness is a particular way of paying attention. So it's paying attention on purpose in the present moment without judgment. So it's just beginning to pay attention as we go through our day, kind of remembering to carry this flashlight around and begin to notice what's showing up. And not to beat ourselves up for, oh my gosh, my mind's wandering again, or to let go of the judgment of that, but just simply to become aware. And something very powerful and even magical happens when we use the flashlight. So when we notice that false alarm going off, suddenly we've unhooked a little bit from our habitual reaction, however we tend to react to stress, and we have a little bit more space or choice of how we want to respond. And so going back to that example that I shared with you the day that I had to bring my daughter to a doctor's appointment that was about an hour away. I was trying to get all these things done, and my habitual reaction is just to kind of keep pushing, and eventually can't get it all done. I get frustrated and kind of have, whatever my version of my stress response, my meltdown. And so this particular day, I remembered to use my tools. I try to do that. I don't always, but in that moment when I was able to recognize, okay, my false alarm is going off. This is not really a life-threatening emergency. Kind of look around. There's no tigers chasing me. So there's this opportunity to just reestablish and reconnect in with a sense of safety right in this present moment. And in that slowing down, just in that little few split seconds, gave me the chance to step back and recognize that what I really needed was to just step outside and eat my lunch in the sunshine for a few minutes, and that the medical records that I was trying to Xerox could get done at the doctor's office, and the phone calls could wait, and that in that slowing down, it really was an opportunity to show up very differently in the day. So when we shine the light, when we bring that mindful awareness to the stuck dial, all of a sudden, we're no longer stuck. Our mind is no longer wandering because we've become aware that it's wandering. So we're back into the present moment of our lives. And going back to that example that I shared with you of being at dinner with my friends, and all of a sudden, my mind is 2 weeks ahead, worrying about all these things that I have to do. When I was able to use the flashlight and catch that and recognize, wait a minute, I'm all the way over here, it's that invitation, it's an opportunity to come back into the present moment and notice what's here, what's happening right now, and to unhook from that mental distraction. When we use the flashlight with the noisy person at the movie theater, it's an opportunity to notice that these thoughts in my head are really just mental constructs. Maybe they're not absolute truth. Maybe I don't have to take everything that I'm saying to myself as 100% reality, and I can recognize that there might be a more helpful story, another way to look at the situation that could help me get through what's going on, and perhaps with more compassion for myself. And when we bring the flashlight to the Velcro problem, it allows us to ask ourselves, what else is happening in my day? Where else might I also want to bring my attention besides just holding on to that negativity? So I want to give you a little bit of experience of mindful awareness. And you all know how to do this. You all do this, throughout your day in ways that you may or may not label it that. But just this idea of stepping out of automatic pilot. So I want to go back to the breath, or the sort of being silent, where I had you follow your thoughts, notice your thoughts. But this time, what I want you to do is to invite you to notice your breath as it comes in and out. So you're just going to feel your breath as you inhale, feel your breath as you exhale. And use your breath as a kind of an anchor. The breath is a great anchor for us because the breath is always in this moment. It's always this breath right here. And so the breath brings us back to this moment. The breath, when we pay attention to the breath, also can dial down some of our survival circuitry. It can step us out of that stress mode. It can help us to create a little bit of a space, a little bit of pause to notice what's here. So as you notice your breath, I'm going to be silent again for a moment or so. And what I want you to do is that every time you notice your mind wandering, to just gently bring it back to the feeling of the breath coming in and the feeling of the breath going out. And not to judge yourself. So your mind may wander 100 times in a minute. That's great. That's 100 times to practice. That's all that much more opportunity. The idea is not that the mind wandering is a problem, but it's every time you bring it back that you've stepped out of automatic pilot, that you're back into this present moment of your life. Okay, so you ready to give it a try? No right or wrong. It's just, these are all little experiments for yourself to observe. Okay, so to close your eyes or bring them to a soft focus and just begin to notice your breath as it comes in and your breath as it goes out. You might even imagine that your breath is a kind of an anchor, like the anchor of a ship that keeps it stable and secure, keeps it in one place, no matter what busy thoughts might be passing by. And every time you notice that your mind wanders, to just gently bring it back, bringing it back to just this breath right here. And then just coming back into the room when you're ready. So we were able to kind of notice those times when your mind was wandering and to bring it back. And so you might, and this is really the beginnings of a basic kind of meditation. But it can be helpful whether we formally meditate or whether we just really think about carrying the flashlight into our day with us. That as we notice our minds wandering, as we notice our minds defaulting to any of these habitual patterns, we can just use the breath, or we can just kind of use that awareness to bring us back to notice what's happening. And in that noticing, the power is that pause, that space, that choice for what might be most needed or helpful in the moment. So I want to try another little experiment with you. This time I'm going to say 3 phrases. And the purpose of this exercise is that a lot of times we get caught in our thoughts. We say things to ourselves, we believe them to be true, or we just get lost in our thoughts. And we can get also caught in our feelings, swept away by the things that we feel. We feel anger, we feel anxious, we feel whatever those things are, and we can kind of get consumed by those feelings. And one of the things that mindfulness, what the flashlight allows us to do, is to notice what's there in a non-judgmental way and just to name it without being so caught in it. And in that little bit of distance or space, again, creates a little bit of choice for how we want to respond. So I'm going to say 3 phrases. As I say each one, I want you to think about a situation that you might say such a phrase to yourself in. So to kind of call the situation up in your mind and really notice what happens in your body as I'm saying each of these phrases. And then we're going to go through it one more time in a little bit of a different manner. Okay, so the first phrase, this is awful. So just really say that, hear that in your own mind, feel that in your body. What situation might that evoke? I'm so angry. Noticing how that feels. I'm so anxious. Noticing how those words feel. Now I want to shift this a little bit. And I'm going to say those 3 phrases again, but I'm going to add the words, I noticed that, in front of it. And I want you to see if it feels any different to you this time around. So I notice that I'm having the thought that this is awful. Just noticing how that feels in your body, what that might feel like if you said that to yourself. I notice that I'm having I notice that I'm feeling a lot of anger in my body in this moment. I notice that I'm experiencing anxiety in my body right now. Anyone feel, sense, hear a difference, experience a difference in that? Yeah.
The second one seems to give more control to the situation.
Mm-hmm. It gives a little bit more space. Yeah. Yeah.
Certain tension leaves.
Yeah. Yeah.
I feel, that it was more separated, it wasn't internal.
Yes. And so even the language, listening to language, how do we talk to ourselves? I'm so angry. It's me. As opposed to I notice that I'm feeling anger. It's a whole different way of experiencing that. And so this is part of that mindful awareness. When we're aware that we're feeling angry, we're not consumed by the anger. So I want to put these 2 exercises we did together now into a 3-minute mindful pause. And so in this 3-minute mindful pause, and I'm going to talk you through this one. The idea is to use your breath as an anchor, if that's helpful. Just noticing your breath as it comes in and noticing your breath as it goes out to kind of start off. And then to just expand your awareness and to really be curious. How's my body feeling? What sensations are present? I feel tightness in my shoulders. I'm feeling a little, whatever, pressure in my chest, an itch in my leg, whatever, just to simply notice. And then noticing, where's my mind? Oh, busy, busy, I'm worrying, I'm thinking, planning, I'm, just feeling restlessness. So just to kind of notice what's there, and then tuning into what are you feeling emotionally? Maybe, whatever is there. I'm feeling calm, I'm feeling a little anxious, I'm feeling, some tension emotionally, whatever that is. So it's a way of observing what's there, almost like looking through a telescope or something like that, so you can kind of see it, but it's not right on top of you. And so we'll do this 3-minute mindful pause together. And I am going to use I have a little bell. So this will, see if I can get this going. You'll hear a little chime at the beginning and at the end. And just allowing yourself to come into a comfortable position where you can sit for a few minutes. And you'll hear the bell, and I'll guide you through as we do this together. So just beginning to notice your breathing, to be aware of your breath as it comes in and as it goes out. There's no right or wrong or any particular way this needs to be. This is just an opportunity to take a pause and to take inventory, to notice what's here right now. So you might notice what your body is holding. Maybe there's tension or tightness. Maybe there are places where you feel more open or spacious. Just be curious. Noticing what's here right now in your body. And very likely your mind will fill with thoughts of one kind or another. See if you might just notice those thoughts without judging them. You might label them thinking, planning, worrying, to-do list, whatever it is. And then just coming back each time to your breath, letting those thoughts come and go so you're noticing them without getting caught in them. Simply observing whatever is here in this moment. And bringing your awareness as well to anything you might be feeling right now. Whether there's restlessness or tiredness or peacefulness or something else. To see if you might just notice whatever is here with some kindness, with some gentleness. Just giving yourself this breathing space to take inventory and be present to whatever arises. And in a moment you hear the bell. Bring your awareness back into the room. So just noticing what that felt like to take that kind of a 3-minute mindful pause and thinking about how that kind of a pause might be helpful in the course of your day. So a couple of things that mindful pause does One is that it steps us out of this kind of automatic pilot, this reactivity. And for many people, not always, and it doesn't have to, but it can have kind of a calming effect of just following the breath. It can definitely dial down some of this survival circuitry. And in that dialing down of the survival circuitry, in that bringing our awareness to what's happening right now, we have a lot more access to our own inner wisdom, to what is needed. Because what I experience in sitting with people in my practice, hundreds of patients over 20 plus years, is that most people really know what is needed, but it's just hard to do it. And if we can create the space, if we can create that pause to just slow down, even for a few seconds, it really allows a different part of our brain to engage, and we're able to see what's needed and to be able to bring greater awareness into our day. So really being able to think about, whether that pause might be helpful at the beginning of the day, just starting the day, checking in, taking inventory in the middle of the day, or, before you have to have a difficult interaction with somebody, that kind of a pause, or when you're noticing you're starting to feel stressed, a way of resetting, kind of hitting the reset button. Did you have a question? Yeah.
Is this pause similar to saying count to 10 when you have a moment of stress? And that I've grown up with it.
It does have some similarities. The idea of it is really doing it from a place of awareness, so that you're aware of, whatever thoughts are there, whatever emotions are there, whatever's happening in the body. There's just a lens in which you're looking through from mindful awareness.
Then that's when paying attention to your breathing is being...
But yes.
And I do understand what you're saying, and I see much appeal in that.
Yes, yeah, and right. So that's, you have heard, and a lot of people, count to 10 or whatever. But when we pay attention to our breath, it does bring us back into this present moment. What are we sensing in our body? And so there's something that shifts when we do that. Yeah. So I want to go show you another tool. And this next tool, so the flashlight is really helpful for working with all of our mental habits here. This next tool is particularly helpful for working with the noisy person in the movie theater. And this is the tool that I call the diet. So thus the spoon. So what is the diet? The diet is to really begin to pay attention to the diet of thoughts that we're feeding ourselves all day long. It's estimated that we have between 50,000 and 70,000 thoughts a day. And when we pay attention to those thoughts, a lot of them, as we were talking about, are not so helpful. They're distorted, they're inaccurate, they're self-critical. And just as a little experiment, I want to try something with you. I'm going to say one word. And I want you to notice what happens in your body when I say this word. And then I'm going to say a second word. Okay. So the first word that I want to share with you is trouble. 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 Just notice what happens in your body as you hear that word. And I want to say another word. Similarly, notice what you experience. Opportunity. 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 Anyone feel a difference there? So a lot of times, that those more negative words can really turn on our survival circuitry, that perceived threat, whereas the word opportunity often has a much more spacious feeling for people. There's kind of more openness there. So even a single word can make a difference in terms of how we feel as we go through a day. Now multiply that by 50,000, right? All of these words, all of these thoughts that we're saying to ourselves, they impact our emotions, whether we're aware of it or not. So I want to teach you a particular diet There's many different ones here, but we'll just pick one for now, which is the diet of accurate, specific, and compassionate thoughts. Accurate, specific, and compassionate. Okay, so let's go back to that example of making a mistake. And I want you to, again, just as a little thought experiment, I'm going to say a series of phrases around making a mistake, and I want you to notice how that feels in your body. So maybe think about a time when you've made a mistake or encountered a difficult situation, something challenging. And hear these words, let these words resonate for you. This is a disaster. I'm so stupid. I can never get things right. What's wrong with me? Just noticing how those words feel in your body. And now I want to, so, and being aware, right? So noticing those words are not self-compassionate. They're not particularly accurate. They're pretty generalized, right? They're not specific to a circumstance. They're very general, kind of attack on one's character. I am so stupid. There's nowhere to go from there. When we talk to ourselves like that, there's really not a lot of place to move. Now I want you to notice what happens when we change that diet, when we make it a little bit more accurate, a little bit more specific to the circumstances, and a little bit more self-compassionate. And also noticing that I'm not talking about Pollyanna kind of thinking here. I'm not saying to go around saying things that you don't believe, you know, I'm the greatest person and everything's wonderful in my life. If that's not, there's nothing wrong with saying that. But that may not be, but it needs to be believable. It needs to be something that you can, that, you know, resonates. So let's try out this diet and just notice how this might sound. Same example, thinking about making a mistake or having a difficult situation. I'm really upset that I made this mistake and I was careless today. There are plenty of times when I do things well, and this is a small moment in the grand scheme of my life, yet nonetheless, it's a difficult one. I need to work on this, and I can see this as a learning experience to pay more attention next time. At least I know I'm human. Different diet. Do you hear a difference? Do you feel a difference in your body in saying that? So it's more self-compassionate. It's more specific to this particular circumstance instead of generalizing to everything. Less of that all or nothing kind of thinking, so more accurate. And just thinking about if we begin to bring this kind of diet into our life, how that might shift how we show up in the day. I want to give you one other diet, which is a really fun one. I like it because it's so simple and it's so, I find, powerful. Think about 3 things that you have to do this week or tomorrow or today. I have to go grocery shopping, I have to bring my mother-in-law to the doctor's, and I have to go to work tomorrow, whatever. Okay, and so have those 3 things in your mind and just to say those in your mind. I have to do X, I have to do Y, I have to do Z. And just notice how that feels. And then we're just going to shift one word, and that is from have to get. I get to go grocery shopping. I get to bring my mother-in-law to the doctor's appointment. I get to go to work tomorrow. And just noticing even how that one word can really shift. I know for me, when I remember to use that, there's really a sense of much more gratitude. Really shifts the whole experience from having to plow through and do all these things to like, wow, I get to go to the grocery store and buy food for myself and my family. So just one word can be incredibly powerful. And then thinking about with some of the bigger things in our life, losing a job, and maybe being able to acknowledge this is difficult, but I'll find a way through. Or break up of a relationship, being able to say, yeah, there may be some things I can work on with communication going forward with other people, but there are ways in which we weren't meant for each other, as opposed to there's something wrong with me. Or something goes wrong in the day, and maybe being able to say this is a glitch, as opposed to this is a disaster. So just these kind of these little shifts in our language can really have an effect on how we can go forward, how we can experience things. And even, you know, something like, I'm too scared to do that, whatever that is. Maybe this would be scary if I did it, but I could choose to do it anyway. Right? So just noticing what kind of diet you might be able to feed yourself or pay attention to, really catching that noisy person, and some questions for reflection. To think about maybe a challenging situation, what kind of thing you typically say to yourself. And to ask yourself, is this accurate? Is this true? Is this specific to the situation? Does it take into account all of the information, all of the evidence that I have? Is there a more helpful story I can tell myself, something more believable? And how might I talk to a friend if they were going through this situation? And that's really a really key one, because we often don't know how to be compassionate with ourselves. But if we can think about it, what would I say to a good friend? And try to bring that kind of compassion to ourselves. That could be very powerful. So let's move on to our last tool. And that is my favorite one here, the magnifying glass. Why do we need a magnifying glass if we already have a flashlight? The magnifying glass allows us to really work with that Velcro problem in particular. And so remember, our minds are really good at holding on to the negative things. So this magnifying glass is a way of going through our day and really trying to magnify these little positive moments in our life that otherwise would so easily slip away. So I want to do a little experiment here. Trying to find something that will work. Let's just say for everybody to bring their attention for a moment to this little, I'm not sure what it is, the circle at the top of the ceiling here, the speaker, and just to notice that. Bring that into your awareness for a moment. Okay. Now, if I hadn't pointed that out to you, if you hadn't directed your attention there, for all intents and purposes, that speaker would not be part of your awareness, would not be part of your experience, right? No big loss if you hadn't noticed it, right? But what if instead of that speaker, it was the look, the glance, a warm smile of a family member before you ran out of the house in the morning? Or maybe it was a warm exchange between you and the store clerk, you know, in the grocery store. Or, you know, the loving glance of a child. Or some other moment in your life. Even just, you know, the taste and savoring of the food that you eat. So thinking about, you know, what are those little moments in our day that so easily can slip away when we're in automatic pilot, when we're not noticing what's there. And seeing this magnifying glass is really an opportunity to look for and find the good in ourselves, which we often don't do, the good in others, in the world, and in our day-to-day experiences. So I want to share a quick story with you about my grandma May. So my grandma lived till 98, and she, at one point in her life, this was, oh boy, quite a while ago. My kids were quite small. She lived at an assisted living facility, like a nursing home assisted facility, but she was sharp as a tack. And I loved spending time with her. And so on this particular day, it was about a 3.5-hour drive for me to get there, but I wanted to spend as much time with her as I could. So I carved out this day. I left early in the morning. I was really excited. There was no traffic. I got there with plenty of time for us to spend together. I walked into her room, and the one thing that I was not expecting happened, which is that she was fast asleep. So, okay, not a big problem. I sort of go over, Grandma, hi, I'm here, and tried to wake her up. Well, she was in a really deep sleep. So I figured, all right, I'll sit on the edge of her bed. I didn't bring anything to do. I didn't expect her to be sleeping. And so I waited a few minutes, no problem. Well, after a few minutes, my mind started going. And I started going into these stories in my head. I'm like, God, I can't believe I drove 3.5 hours. When is she going to wake up? What if she doesn't wake up anytime soon? I'm not going to have any time with her, and then this is going to be a wasted day, and I can't believe, this is happening. And I just started spiraling. So I did the only thing that I knew how to do, which was to start to just follow my breath. And so I just started breathing in, and I started breathing out, noticing all this mental chatter going on, all this negativity that I was getting pulled into. And as I did that, I then became aware of her breathing. And so I was aware of my own breathing, but then really just noticed her breath coming in and out. And then I became aware of her presence. And it's kind of that feeling of walking into the room and maybe seeing a sleeping child. And I just became aware of this love of just being in the room with my grandmother and just feeling the essence of, who she was and being there with her. And it was just such a beautiful moment for me. And what I realized is that I could have so easily missed that opportunity if I had just been caught in all this negativity in my own head. And it was right there in front of me. And so that we have these opportunities in our life at any given point to really notice what's here, to take in something good, something positive that can really add some resilience into our day, can bring some joy. In some ways, these little moments of our life, which when we really look at the end of the day, at the end of our lives, become the fabric of our life. And so, by the way, my grandmother did wake up after a short time. We had a nice day together. But, so the magnifying glass, as Rick Hansen says, it's not just about noticing, oh, that was a nice thing that happened today, but it's about taking 30 seconds, maybe a minute, maybe 2 minutes at most, to install that experience into our bodies, to actually take it in as a felt sense. And we're going to do that in just a moment. We'll do a little 2-minute installation of something positive. And that is where it can really begin to become a buffer for stress, but also just allow us to experience these little positive things in our day that we might miss. So if Larry David had remembered to use his magnifying glass, how might that have looked a little bit different? Maybe he would have first, with the flashlight, kind of noticed, oh my gosh, I'm getting caught in this negativity. I'm starting to ruminate. I'm stuck on, why is this person not liking me? But then maybe he came with a loved one or a friend. And so it's taking just that few minutes and thinking about, pausing and really taking in, I'm sitting next to this person, and just really reflecting on and feeling the love or the shared, commonality between them. And maybe that would have shifted his evening a little bit. So let's take a moment to do a little installing of something positive. So what I invite you to do is to think about something positive that's present for you right now. It could just be the fact that you made this time for yourself this afternoon to come here and be here in this nice warm space. It could be thinking about some little thing you're grateful for. Maybe it was that great cup of coffee you had this morning, or a cup of tea. Or it could be something bigger in your life, somebody that you love or appreciate. Whatever that is, just to call that up in your mind right now. And you can close your eyes, or you could bring your eyes to a soft focus, and to just begin to really allow that experience to be magnified in your mind. So as if you could take that magnifying glass and really focusing on that experience, noticing how that feels in your body. Taking in that feeling of gratitude, love, or appreciation for something little or big in your life. And really feeling that in your body. Noticing where you feel it. Many people, there may be a sense of more spaciousness, heart opening, lightness. And then just allowing that feeling to magnify, maybe even spreading through your body from head to toe. or surrounding you. Just taking this moment to take in something good in your life that's right here, right now. And taking a few deeper, slower, more intentional breaths. And coming back into the room when you're ready. So that was just a minute or two, but just noticing how that felt to pause and focus on something positive, something good in your life. And one important point I want to say is that the magnifying glass is not about burying our heads in the sand. It's not about pushing away difficult emotions, because there's actually a tool for that, which another talk we'll get into, how to work with difficult emotions. But it's important. Sometimes we need to attend to, we might be feeling sadness or loss or grief or other things that need our attention. But it's about not missing those little positive things which might also be there. And so I would just want to share a very quick last story with you, which is that my father has experienced some significant health problems in the past 6 months or so. He's actually doing much better. But at one point, he had ended up in the hospital. He was actually in the emergency. They let him sit there for 4 or 5 hours without any attention. By the time they got him in, he was in a kind of a life-threatening situation, needed to have emergency surgery. And I saw him in the hospital, so this was a day or two later. And what I was really struck by is that what he kept talking about was how wonderful the nurses were, how grateful he was for the attention that he was getting. And every time a nurse would walk into the room, he would say, "Oh, there's so-and-so, and they've been so wonderful to me, and thank you so much for, helping me." And it just really struck me that it would have been so easy for him to focus on, oh my God, the story of, can't believe they left me in the waiting room for 4 hours, and look what happened, and now I'm back in the hospital, and this is my second time in the hospital in 3 weeks, and all of that kind of thing. And not that he didn't have those thoughts, or he didn't have fear, or he didn't have other things that he was experiencing, but by being able to magnify some of those little positive moments in our day, it can offer us some resilience, even when we're facing some of those biggest challenges in our lives. So I want to just kind of recap here for a moment, and to go back to those 3 quotes that I shared with you at the beginning. So the first is that well-being is fundamentally no different than learning to play the cello. So we have some tools that we can bring into our day with us, ones that don't take a whole lot of time. And when we remember to carry them with us, they can help to shift some of the moments, shift some of the way that we show up and how we go forward into our day, that can begin to make a difference. We have our challenges. We have these habitual patterns that we can default to, that we can kind of get stuck in. These reactive automatic patterns. We have, our false alarm, we have our noisy person, we have our stuck dial, we have our Velcro problem. And those are universal challenges that we all deal with. But my favorite quote here is, obstacles do not block the path, they are the path. And so here's the real magical thing, that when we use our tools, when we remember our flashlight, our diet, our magnifying glass, and we begin to notice some of these habitual ways that these habits show up in our mind, these mental habits that we can get stuck in, that it becomes an opportunity. So that every time we notice the false alarm, we notice the stress response, that we're getting stressed in our day, it's an opportunity to pause, to create that mindful pause, that little space, to remind ourselves that there's no lions chasing us, and to cultivate some sense of safety and stability. Even in that moment, some sense of confidence in our ability to handle what's here and to step back and to see what's needed. So rather than reacting, to be able to respond more wisely, listening to our own inner wisdom. And when we notice the stuck dial, when we notice our mind wandering, it's that invitation to come back, to be present right here to this moment, to what's happening now. And that kind of steps us back into our life and can help us feel more alive. When we notice the noisy person at the movie theater and that inner dialogue going on in our head that can often be self-critical or distorted in ways, it's an opportunity to gain more perspective, to step back, to see the bigger picture, and to cultivate self-compassion. And when we notice the Velcro problem, when we get stuck in negativity, it's an opportunity to kind of move our magnifying glass around and see if there might be some little moments where we can cultivate joy and gratitude in our life. And so as we work with each of these mental habits, we actually dial down the circuits for survival, and we turn on those circuits that really help us to thrive in our daily life. So I want to leave you with a poem. And this is a poem from my book called Gifts of the Rain Puddle. It's actually the poem that inspired the title of the book. It's called Gifts of the Rain Puddle. I woke up, and actually, let me just say, I wrote this poem. It was really a reminder to myself to remember to use some of my tools, which I try to do in my day, but I love giving these talks because it's a great remember, just keeps me on my toes, keeps me remembering to bring these tools into my own life. I woke up from a funk today of too many bills, too many emails to return, not enough time. From that irritability that creeps in insidiously, like a dark shadow, ready to swallow us all if we let it in. I woke up to discover that I had inherited a small fortune. Actually, if truth be told, would you believe that I forgot that it was here all along? My neighbor reminded me this morning, the little guy in the overalls and dirt-filled fingernails. I saw him laughing hysterically as he jumped in a giant puddle, a leftover gift from the torrential rains. As he soaked himself and went back for more, then began running and shrieking through the wet grass with his unsteady gait until he fell down in a heap, all smiles. I watched as he became fascinated by the blades of grass and even more animated when he discovered the stones nearby that he could grasp in his hands. How funny that you and I and my neighbor can all look at the same sights, the ordinary moments of our lives, and see such different things. It is a choice what we focus on, after all, is it not? Perhaps waking up is as simple as not losing sight of the gifts of the rain puddle. Thank you so much, all of you. I really appreciate it. Wow. Thank you. Thank you so much for being here. I am happy to stay and take questions. I have some books, 3 different books that are on display you're welcome to take a look at, and if anybody wants to purchase them. One is the book that this talk was based on, Dancing on the Tightrope, Transcending the Habits of Your Mind and Awakening to Your Fullest Life. There's a couple of other tools and another challenge that I didn't talk about, but anyway, that's interwoven in the book. I have the Transformative Power of 10 Minutes, an 8-week guide to reducing stress and cultivating well-being. And that one is a real practical, hands-on. Every day there's an exercise that takes 10 minutes or less. There's 26 audio meditations that are accessible with that book to really help bring some of these tools into your day. And then there's the Gifts of the Rain Puddle, Poems, Meditations, and Reflections for the Mindful Soul. I have a blog to inspire well-being that is on my website, bethkurland.com, which you can sign up for if you'd like on my website. I have a sign-up sheet also over there, and I'm happy to take questions. So, and again, thank you all for being here.